simply excellent political and trading relationship with China, and I'm not going to qualify that. It's an excellent relationship. The negotiations were difficult, but they've resulted in a first world-class FTA with essentially, other than a relatively modest extension of time for the developing country partner in this negotiation that on the surface looks as unequal as asymmetry of power as you can find. There's essentially no S&D in it at all. It's gone extremely well. We've now complemented that with an FTA with Hong Kong, the second constituent customs territory of China, and it just goes from strength to strength. And before anyone cynically says it's just about dairy, it's not. 25% of our exports are on dairy. But China is just such a natural complementary partner to New Zealand. The relationship works like clockwork, and I'm not going to qualify that. Now, I think if I could just sort of go from the particular to a little bit of political theory, I think part of your question is essentially around power and sharing and responsibility. And like a lot of analysts, I think it's time for us now to truly understand what political theorists have been saying to us. That we're all used to thinking in terms of a single hegemony, and it's time to stop it. So if we just use the last 200 years as an example, it was this tiny country, physically the size of New Zealand, a larger population, of course, the United Kingdom, that was the first country to break out of an agrarian past and create what we all called the first industrial revolution, and exercised massive power from getting ahead of the bunch in economic terms, which translated itself into huge soft power, massive military powers. The Great Britain, justly called, exercised global reach. That single hegemon was replaced by the United States, and it's very important we understand that this is not a zero-sum game any longer. We are not, quote, replacing the United States. We are complementing the United States with at least two other centers of global power that are still emerging. And they are, in a sense, like the United States. I mean, but for the history of this great country, we could have had 50 states, not the United States. And one could make, I think, the same observation about the civilization states of China and of India. So we're seeing three capitals: Washington, New Delhi, and China. Not quite there yet, but we're moving to this future with extraordinary rapidity, in which there will no longer be a single hegemon. There will be these three great centers, and at the next layer of power are some incredibly important other countries. They will include most certainly Brazil, most certainly Indonesia, currently the fourth largest country in the world with 240 million people, and making great progress, let's say, it's about our Indonesian colleagues. Probably Russia, after all the chaos of the last 20 years, still the 12th largest economy in the world. They will get their act together, I'm certain of that, over the next 20 years. So that's the world we're going to. And so forget the single hegemon thing and the paranoia associated with it. If they're gaining power, we're losing power. Well, no. We have to move now to new modes, and I think part of the problem when I look across various theatres of world politics, I'm also a minister responsible for climate change negotiations, is that the instrumentalities of power internationally simply are not adjusting fast enough to this emerging structure. But I think you can see clear signs of these hugely important countries that are becoming superpowers stepping up to the mark. I will repeat what I've just said favourably about India, and the shift in their negotiating position, particularly marked since Congress won the election. I sense China is a constructive force. I'm well aware there will be people in this room who will have great difficulty with that statement. I'm just telling you what my experience with China is. And I'm also conscious of the point Mustapa made, that this is a transition process we're describing here about power. And they still are, as they constantly and correctly remind us, they still are developing countries. China still has a way to go before it has eradicated poverty, for all the extraordinary progress China has made. It still has to deal with the churn factor, which underlies the difficulty the United States and China have in resolving this issue around currency and the role of the RMB. We all know that. I mean, that's the root of this whole issue, dealing with the churn factor. We know that in India, 29% of people of India are still below the absolute poverty line. But very important to remember that that figure of 29% is falling by 1 percentile point every year as the growth process and development processes work. For all their imperfections, you know, let's not forget that famous World Bank study of 10 years ago. Growth is good for the poor. And those of you who are academically inclined may recall the key point in that study, which was that there's an extraordinary correlation between the income of the lowest quintile in developing countries with their rate of growth, or put it this way in more common sense terms. If you live in developing country Y and it grew at 3% and you're in the bottom 20% of that, your income grew almost exactly 3% over the last 10 years. And if you grew at 6%, your income grew 6%. So much for the left-wing problem with the so-called trickle-down theory of growth. All the evidence suggests to me it doesn't work perfectly, but it works in large measure. So, you know, I think we're in a transition period. I sense that India and China and Brazil are up to the challenge, but it's new, it's difficult. They still have their development challenges. I think in the WTO context, unquestionably now we have the right grouping, which is, boy, has that taken time to come together, the P5 in the WTO. And it's intriguing. I'm going to say this at the risk of perhaps upsetting some of my developing country friends in the P5 that might be in the audience. I think they themselves have got some uncomfortableness with this, because they're very conscious, coming ideologically out of the G77, of the tradition of solidarity that the G77 represented, however imperfect it is now in today's world. But they're trying to manage that with their own outreach programs. And I've always said, you know, that if we go back to the Uruguay round and all the criticism that was made of the Blair House Agreement, hey, we would never have done the deal without the Blair House Agreement, when the two then dominant economic or trading powers, the European Commission representing the then 15 countries of the EU, and the United States, walked off into Blair House and did the deal, and where negotiators had failed to do anything serious, as in internal support and agriculture, they wrote the deal. Where the negotiators had done an excellent deal, they didn't change very much, because they couldn't. Not even the two greatest powers on the planet in 1993 could change completely the deal. Well, my argument is we need a new Blair House to complete the WTO deal. And that new Blair House is no longer the EU and the US, it's these 5 countries. And it hasn't yet developed a strong working tradition. It's still sensitive, it's still trying to find its feet, but that's where we've got to go.